Hello everyone, I wanted to do this quick screencast for you on World War One. I'm going to try to keep it to 15 minutes, so I have a lot to do and a little time to do it in, so I'm going to move quickly. World War One, of course, it wasn't called World War One. They didn't know there'd be a World War Two, so it went by many names. The Great War, the War to End All Wars, the War to Make the World Safe for Democracy. Some people called it the Big One. And we're going to look at this from a very American perspective. So with that in mind, the beginning of the war is something we're going to gloss over very quickly. What was the cause of World War One? The cause of World War One, the immediate cause anyway, was the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand by a Serbian nationalist. Serbia, which wanted its independence, is going to assassinate, or at least a radical component is going to assassinate the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Now, Serbia and Austria aren't the most powerful countries in Europe. We look at countries like Russia and Germany and France and England, but this assassination is going to cause a chain reaction that will lead to one of the largest wars in the history of the world. We sometimes use this mnemonic device to help us remember uh, how World War One started. And we look at things like militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism as the major causes of World War One. Now, as Europe is embroiled in horrible warfare, Americans are looking across the Atlantic Ocean, very glad that they've followed Washington's advice to avoid entangled alliances. And this idea is going to be very important, both to us avoiding World War One and later the United States not getting involved in World War Two as early as perhaps many people thought we should have. And that will certainly influence the post-World War II period as well. So this is a really important idea to American history. Europe has been called a powder keg waiting for a spark, and the spark was certainly the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Now, World War One is considered to be the first modern war. Um, it was a particularly brutal and horrific war to hear about. Battle techniques had not changed, but technology had. So soldiers were still charging the front lines. They would use artillery for a number of hours and then charge, but they were just mowed down by machine guns or hand grenades or poison gas or barbed wire. It's also referred to as the first modern war because there was a degree of total war. We talked about that with the Civil War and General Sherman, but certainly it was mastered during World War One. And we're going to talk more about U-boats and submarine warfare as we move forward. Now, understanding how horrible World War One was is very important to understand why after the war, Americans and really many other nations were so reticent and so unwilling to get involved in another war. Some of these pictures are incredibly powerful. You look at the gas mask, you look at these pictures, it almost looks like a sci-fi movie or something with absolutely no life there. And the absolute devastation and horrible conditions of World War One are going to really have a huge impact on people not willing or able to get involved in another conflict, World War Two. This is a very powerful picture. You can see this guy is suffering from a poison gas attack. You can see these guys have the gas mask on. War of attrition that they would fight, and thousands would die for 100 yards of ground. World War One was absolutely a horrible, horrible war to learn about, and when you read the primary documents, it's just horrific. Trench warfare, war of attrition, all these things we've talked about. Now, as that was going on in Europe, that's the point that I want to make. As this was going on in Europe, Americans were very, very glad that we were avoiding war. But as we know, America is going to move towards war. So what brought America into the war? A number of things. Unlike World War II, where there's a singular event, Pearl Harbor, there's not a singular event that moves Americans towards war, but there's a series of events that eventually will push America towards war. Most notably, the sinking of the Lusitania. The Lusitania was an English passenger ship that Germany had accused the English using to carry weapons, a charge that turned out to be true. Germany was so much trying to avoid America getting involved that they even put these ads in American newspapers. I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but you can pause the YouTube video now and read it yourself. But essentially, it's warning passengers not to board these ships. Nonetheless, submarine warfare was viewed by Americans as uncivilized. There were a number of very famous passengers that were on the Lusitania, and it's going to start to move public opinion against Germany. Now, what's interesting about that is we think, of course, Germany has been our enemy in the 20th century, but World War I, it's not clearly defined yet. By the time World War II happens and Adolf Hitler, clearly Germany's our enemy. But World War I, there's a lot of German Americans. There's a lot of Irish Americans. Irish Americans were oftentimes very anti-England. So originally, there was a degree of empathy and support for Germany. So things like the Lusitania are going to slowly move Americans towards supporting England over Germany, and eventually will cause Americans to get involved in the war. Notable, but probably less important than it's given credit for, is the Zimmerman telegram. What do I mean by that? The Zimmerman telegram wasn't really taken seriously. It was allegedly, it was a telegram by Germany to Mexico, encouraging Mexico to go to war with America, to distract America so America wouldn't be able to get involved in the war. Well, this would be a really, intense claim. This certainly would get Americans mad if it were true. But Woodrow Wilson didn't take this seriously. The Mexican government didn't believe that this was real. Most people today, even today, there's a degree of mystery about the Zimmerman telegram. Most people think that it was perhaps just a citizen in England who kind of concocted this idea, or some type of public relations attempt by by England. But very few people took it seriously, except the American people. This reminds me a little bit of yellow journalism, the covering of the Zimmerman note. I don't want to confuse the issue. We all know that yellow journalism is most often associated with the Spanish-American War. But this was, really interesting fodder for the American people. And I love this cartoon. Gosh, they've got the German helmet on, the Mexican sombrero. It couldn't be more cliche or stereotypical. But this little tag here, some promise, so many Americans were angered by the Zimmerman note. In the end, what's going to push America into the war is this unrestricted submarine warfare. I love this cartoon. I just think it's a great cartoon. Here's the ship being sunk, and it's called Patience. America's patience has been sunk. Prior to America getting involved in the war, Woodrow Wilson had to run for re-election, and in 1916 he runs for re-election, and his slogan is "He kept us out of war." He wins a fairly close race in 1916. He doesn't win in a landslide or anything, and his promise to keep us out of war was one of the reasons that he won. After winning the war, a mere 5 months later, America gets involved in World War I. Now, we're really not going to look at the war in much detail at all, but we're going to focus quite a bit on the American home front, because that's the part that you really need to know for this class. And there's a number of things going on in America that are of interest. One is the campaign to sell Liberty bonds. I'll be talking a lot about that later. The other interesting thing is how much the war affected Americans. Today, I feel like we don't really feel that. America had a war with Iraq and Afghanistan, and it certainly didn't affect our supermarket. We still have aisles and aisles of cereal that we can pick from. But during this time period, Americans really had to tighten their belt during the war, and that's illustrated by daylight savings time was born out of World War I, because the need to maximize daylight and to save fuel that would otherwise be used to power the lights and whatnot. The propaganda and the selling of the war is really important and notable. And although there has always been a degree of that, it was taken to its height during World War I. And this guy is a very important guy. You should all know his name. His name's George Creel. George Creel was the head of the Committee on Public Information, and he's known for creating some of the most famous posters in American history. And you're going to notice, I'm going to go through these posters very quickly, but you're going to notice that there's often this theme, and it's the theme of the woman usually clutching a baby. She's in dire straits. She's gonna suffer imminent attack, the likes of which who only knows. It's very intense, these posters. And slogans like "Halt the Hun," "The Fire in the Background." So as I go through these posters with you, I'm going to do them very quickly, but wait till you see. I mean, so many of them have this as their theme. This one, it doesn't, but this one's kind of funny because it speaks to that uh, what's called victory gardens, the idea that we need food, so have a little garden, can your fruit, can your vegetables, and can the Kaiser too. I love that cartoon. Um, Here's another one, the Germans depicted as a King Kong type, and there's the woman. Another one, gosh, lurking in the shadows, clutching her baby. Incredibly scary cartoon. These are very visceral, these posters, and they're designed as propaganda, needless to say. The most famous piece of propaganda, arguably ever, comes out of World War I, Uncle Sam, I Want You. And I just got carried away because these posters are so powerful and interesting and in some regards funny. But moving forward, some more World War I-isms, what I call World War I-isms. There was such a desire for nationalism and patriotism and to present Germany in a negative light that you see some of these funny what I call World War I-isms. So we're not going to call our beloved lunch meal here a Frankfurter because that's too German. We're going to call it a hot dog. Now that one stuck. Most of them didn't, and we laugh when we look at them now. Sauerkraut, Liberty cabbage, hamburger, Liberty steak. This one makes me laugh because even measles, even something bad, we're not going to give the Germans the pride of having their measles named after them. So we call them Liberty measles. Yeah, and the list goes on and on. Moving forward, though, limiting civil liberties at home. Incredibly interesting parallel here between John Adams and the Quasi-War with France when he passed the Alien and Sedition Acts. Woodrow Wilson passes the Espionage and Sedition Acts. And the Espionage Act made it a crime to interfere with the draft, and the Sedition Act essentially made it a crime to criticize Woodrow Wilson during the war. Notably, we remember that Eugene V. Debs went to jail for violating these laws, but there's an even more important case that came out of this, and that's Schenck versus the United States. Now, the balance here, the argument here is between freedom of speech and this idea that speech can be dangerous. As Oliver Wendell Holmes will present, this idea of clear and present danger. So if your speech presents a clear and present danger, and he gave the most famous example, we've all heard this, I'm sure, that if you shout fire in a crowded theater, and people run out of the theater scared that there's a fire and people are trampled and hurt, that's not freedom of speech. That's a dangerous behavior, and it's illegal. So Oliver Wendell Holmes said, not all speech is protected, not all speech is okay, if that speech provides a clear and present danger. To this day, when the Supreme Court has issues involving freedom of speech, this is what they use. They call it the test, the clear and present danger test. So if your speech provides a clear and present danger, you're not protected under the First Amendment. Now, that's the law. That's the interpretation by the Supreme Court. You might agree or disagree, but at the time, the Supreme Court believed that trying to interfere with the draft was a clear and present danger, and Schenck lost his case, establishing a very important principle. And the principle is this, that during times of war, people often have less rights, and we're going to see that in World War II, and you could argue that we saw that during the war in Iraq, and even today during the war on terror. With seconds left, I'm sorry I couldn't finish it.